In the heat of the Cold War, the battle for global air dominance wasn't just about raw power, it was about sending a message. The Soviet Union, eager to assert its technological prowess, produced the MiG-23 Flogger. It was a jet that embodied the urgent, often reckless spirit of Cold War military strategy, designed to counter the United States' air superiority in the sky. At the heart of the MiG-23 was its power plant, the Tumansky R-29 turbojet engine, capable of delivering immense thrust. It propelled the MiG-23 to speeds exceeding Mach 2, making it one of the fastest aircraft of its time. But despite its raw power, the engine's flaws became evident over time. It was an engine of extremes, delivering speed and altitude, but often at the cost of reliability and longevity. While the MiG-23 was marketed as a versatile, cutting-edge interceptor, its performance in real-world conditions revealed that the R-29 engine was less a technological marvel and more a ticking time bomb. This script explores the dark truths behind the engines and its impact on Soviet pilots, mechanics, and military strategy during the Cold War. The Tumansky R-29 was a single-shaft turbojet with an afterburner designed for sheer speed. Developed in the late 1960s, it was the power plant that would drive the MiG-23 into the high-speed, high-altitude airspace where it could outpace and intercept adversary bombers. When the R-29 functioned correctly, it allowed the MiG-23 to reach Mach 2.3 faster than many American fighter jets of the era. But in the context of military aviation, raw speed often comes with sacrifices. The R-29's biggest flaw was its short service life. While Western engines like the American J-79 could last thousands of flight hours with proper maintenance, the R-29 was only rated for around 150 to 200 hours of operation before it needed a major overhaul. This relatively short lifespan wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It meant that pilots and ground crews had to operate under constant pressure. The MiG-23's flight hours were measured not in months or years, but in the number of takeoffs and landings before the engine required replacement. This high turnover rate meant that maintenance crews had little time to thoroughly assess or repair the engines, leading to a maintenance cycle of continual replacement rather than lasting repair. For pilots, the Tumansky R-29 was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it was a powerhouse, propelling the MiG-23 to speeds that rivaled the fastest jets of the time. On the other hand, it was temperamental, prone to unpredictable failures and often a source of deep anxiety for pilots who flew it. The MiG-23 with its variable geometry wings was designed to be agile and versatile. However, these wings could throw the R-29 engine into a tailspin when transitioning between low-speed and high-speed modes. This was a problem because the engine struggled to maintain steady thrust under such dramatic aerodynamic changes. One of the most dangerous aspects of the R-29 was its tendency to experience compressor stalls, a situation where the airflow to the engine's combustion chamber became disrupted. A stall could occur during high-speed turns or sudden throttle adjustments, causing the engine to lose power or even flame out altogether. Pilots learned to fly the MiG-23 cautiously. Some would only push the engine's power limits in controlled conditions, avoiding risky maneuvers that might trigger an engine failure. But even the most experienced pilot knew that sometimes, despite their best efforts, the engine could fail when they needed it the most. One former pilot recalled, "The engine was always a source of worry. In combat, I was more afraid of the engine dying than the enemy. If the engine went, you were in trouble." The R-29 engine didn't just create headaches for pilots. It was a constant challenge for the maintenance crews who were tasked with keeping the MiG-23 airborne. The Soviet Union's military often lacked the advanced tools and diagnostic equipment that their Western counterparts had at their disposal. Mechanics were forced to work with basic equipment, often relying on ingenuity and improvisation to keep engines running. The MiG-23's design was unforgiving. Accessing and replacing the engine was a complex task, requiring disassembly of the rear fuselage and the wings. Even with all the right tools, it was a time-consuming process. In the field, spare parts were often in short supply, and many units were forced to cannibalize one MiG-23 to repair another. This meant that many of the aircraft in service were constantly in a state of half-readiness. For the crews, working with the R-29 was not just a matter of fixing one problem, but constantly addressing a series of issues that never seemed to end. Frequent breakdowns and engine replacements meant that the technicians worked long hours, often with little rest, just to keep the fleet in the air. The MiG-23 with its Tumansky R-29 engine was marketed as the answer to NATO's air superiority, and the Soviets exported it to countries around the world. But the reality of operating the MiG-23 was far from the glamorous propaganda. In the Middle East, where dust and sand were constant challenges, the R-29 quickly proved to be ill-suited for the harsh conditions. The engines became clogged with debris, leading to frequent malfunctions. Pilots were forced to adapt to their unreliable machines, often aborting missions or returning early due to engine failures. In Libya, the situation was no better. Despite receiving substantial Soviet aid, the Libyan Air Force struggled to keep their MiG-23 fleet operational. The R-29 engines would frequently overheat, leading to power loss or even complete engine failure during critical moments. The Libyan pilots reported that engine performance was inconsistent, and ground crews often found themselves in a constant battle to keep the aircraft functional. India also encountered difficulties with the MiG-23's engine. Despite modification and improvements, the R-29's reputation as an unreliable power plant was hard to overcome. Even in countries with the resources to support advanced aviation maintenance, the engine's performance left much to be desired. One of the most bizarre incidents involving the MiG-23 and its Tumansky R-29 engine occurred in 1989, when a Soviet MiG-23 took off from Poland. Shortly after takeoff, the pilot ejected from the aircraft due to a suspected engine failure, but the jet, undeterred, continued to fly on autopilot. Unmanned, the MiG-23 crossed several borders: East Germany, West Germany, and into Belgium before finally crashing into a farmhouse in France. This incident, which could have led to international disaster, became an international embarrassment for the Soviet Union. The event highlighted the MiG-23's unstable nature as it continued to fly despite its engine issues. It was a symbol of the aircraft's chaotic blend of power and unpredictability. In this case, the engine's performance was not the immediate cause of the incident. It was the pilot's panic-induced decision to abandon the aircraft. However, the engine's lack of reliability played a crucial role in causing the pilot's fear in the first place. By the early 1990s, the MiG-23 was being phased out of frontline service. The newer Su-27 and MiG-29 offered superior aerodynamics, more reliable engines, and better avionics. The R-29, once a symbol of Soviet air power, became obsolete. As the Soviet Union collapsed, the MiG-23, along with its troublesome engine, was relegated to secondary roles. In the years following, many MiG-23s were grounded, not because of their age, but because of their engines could no longer be serviced effectively. The Tumansky R-29 was no longer a viable option for modern air forces. Today, only a few MiG-23s remain in museums, serving as reminders of an era of Cold War excess and engineering ambition gone awry. For all its speed and power, the MiG-23's turbulent history serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing speed and power over reliability. While the MiG-23's R-29 engine was far from perfect, it was still a potent weapon for the Soviet Union in the Cold War arms race. However, how did the R-29 compare to its Western counterparts, particularly the Pratt & Whitney J-79 engine used in the iconic F-4 Phantom? The J-79, much like the R-29, was a turbojet engine, but with a far longer lifespan and more consistent performance. While the MiG-23's R-29 often required overhauls after a short period of use, the J-79 could power the F-4 Phantom for thousands of flight hours with minimal maintenance. In terms of reliability, the J-79 outperformed the R-29 by a significant margin. This led to fewer emergency landings and more predictable performance in the skies. The comparison between these two engines highlights the core difference between Soviet and Western air power during the Cold War. The West, while not immune to technological failures, was often able to prioritize engineering precision and reliability, something that was not always the case with the Soviet designs. The MiG-23 powered by the Tumansky R-29 was not just a mechanical tool. It had political implications. The Soviet Union used it as a showcase of its military strength, exporting it to various allied nations. But as these engines failed in service, they revealed cracks in the image of Soviet invincibility. Countries like Egypt, Syria, and Iraq, who had to receive these aircraft, found themselves grappling with the shortcomings of the MiG-23. The West, watching closely, used these failures to their advantage. highlighting the instability of Soviet military technology. The MiG-23's operational shortcomings were used in propaganda efforts by both NATO and the media to paint the Soviet Union as a declining superpower unable to maintain its technological edge. Though it was replaced by more advanced aircraft, the MiG-23 left a lasting legacy. It was one of the most widely used Soviet jets and remains in service with several countries to this day, albeit in limited numbers. It served during the Cold War and the Middle East. The Tumansky R-29 was never meant to last. It was a wartime engine, built in peacetime, engineered to push limits rather than respect them. It made the MiG-23 fast, dangerous, and competitive, but also fragile, unstable, and short-lived. Its legacy is one of contradiction. It taught engineers what not to do. It taught pilots how to survive flying something unpredictable. And it taught strategists that high performance on paper means nothing if it can't hold together in the real world. The MiG-23 wasn't a failure, but it wasn't a success either. It was a warning, a jet that came screaming into the future with afterburners blazing, only to fall short of its own promise. And at the center of it all was the Tumansky R-29, the heart of fire that burned too fast, too hot, and far too briefly.